Welcome to the RJLT Economics. In this podcast, I want to discuss the possibility of instability setting in Central and Eastern Europe in the aftermath of the current conflict. I want to divide today's podcast into four relatively concise sections. First, I want to discuss why I think there is this risk of instability in that region. Secondly, I want to lay out two possible scenarios of the outcome of the current conflict and how they could lead to different nuances or different variations in the instability that then sets in Central and Eastern Europe. Thirdly, I want to discuss or describe how I think possibly instability will roll out and set in. And finally, I want to discuss who will be the beneficiaries and who the losers could be. So first things first, why do I think that it is possible for CEE to become a region of instability? The answer is the emotional and strategic, reckless decisions primarily by the European Union and European governments to send, but also its Atlanticist allies, let's say, to send three things primarily to Eastern Europe, primarily Poland. That is weapons, mercenaries, and volunteers. And let's be absolutely clear here. The type of volunteers who would go to an unarmed conflict are not the type of volunteers who go to homeless shelters and hand out food and clothes to people in need. Right? These are the people who are drawn to violence, and usually these type of people tend to share some certain type of ideologies that are more militant, and they are more predisposed to be radicalized. I'm just putting it very straightforwardly, right? If anyone feels being offended by this type of comments, well, you can leave a comment below. Well, that's all I can say. Now let's move on to the second section, which are the two possible scenarios of how this current conflict will play out. The first one, which seems to me to be what let's call it the liberal democracies wish for, which is that the conflict will be a long and drawn-out war. This means that there's going to be a proxy war, and Poland will then be used as a staging ground, right? We will see continued supply of weapons, of mercenaries, of volunteers going to this region, mostly Poland, but also some other ones, and jump over the border and engage in armed conflict. Alternative scenario, I think this is more likely, and I think it's better for the world as a whole, which is a quick, relatively swift Russian victory. I'm not saying that the Russians are such angels, right? But the thing is, with a quick Russian victory, there will be fewer refugees, there will be fewer weapons sent to this region, sent to Central Eastern Europe, and so we will have, and there will be fewer fighters. That means that the strains in that region will be actually less than if there's a long proxy war, because when with these weapons, mercenaries, and volunteers sending into Poland. Another thing actually that's going to this region, primarily Poland, is refugees. Right? When you have a lot of weapons floating around, automatic weapons, rocket launchers floating around in a country, there are a lot of people who are hyperactive, predisposed to violence. And then you have a lot of refugees who put a very high strain on the country's economy. What you're going to have is, I will discuss in the next section how I think this could play out in various degrees, because of the difference in the scenarios of the conclusion of the current conflict. There's going to be different differences in degrees, right? It could be very unstable, the situation, or it could be somewhat unstable. But I think there's a high degree of risk of some sort of instability, regardless of the outcomes. Now, there is also a third possible outcome, one that I think probably will not lead to instability of Central and Eastern Europe, because in that outcome, there will not be much let's not call it civilization, not many people left in that region. And so don't even go there. I do not think that we will go that far, because I think there are, even though some of the politicians are reckless, they may have hot heads. They may even give certain commands. But I think that there are in the military, I think there are still rational voices, and rational voices who can foresee the danger of continued escalation in the military sphere, right? So I think let's not go there. And of course, I do believe that if we go there, if we were to go there, I think the Russian threats of using WMDs are not an empty threat. I think they will have no choice but to follow through. And the reason is very simple, because if they are defeated in this war, their country will be pillaged. It will certainly be carved up, and that will be a disaster. For them, it is much better to have a controlled application of WMDs, using just in some strategic targets. And this will actually lead to a conclusion, I think, of the current conflict. But that would be one that will lead to decades, if not a century, of depression. And that is something that is unimaginable. Let's not go there. Okay, so the third section is how this is going to roll out. Well, depending on whether we have a proxy war using Poland as a jumping board. And by the way, why do I say Poland again and again? For three reasons, I think. One, because Poland has the longest land border with the region that is currently in conflict. Secondly, because Poland has claims on the region that is particularly sensitive, which is, I think, East Galicia. At one point, it used to be part of, let's say, their cultural sphere, and it was under use of Stalin that that part was taken and annexed into the Soviet Union. So that was some historic legacy there. And finally, of course, because Polish and the language spoken across the border And I try to mention, of course, the keywords less, right? The two languages are very, very similar. So it provides it makes it more easy if you want to launch an insurgency war, as suggested by the former first lady of a certain country, and of course also former Secretary of State of the same country. She mentions that, and of course, if that is to happen, the jumping ball is going to be Poland. And of course, that's basically why I say that. But it's really the entire region. I think perhaps in that region, the one country that is slightly safer would be Hungary, because there's a really strong language barrier, and I think their government is less enthused in hosting weapons, mercenaries, and volunteers. So that is just my take. How I think it's going to roll out? Well, it's very simple. We see that in Central and Eastern Europe, military budgets have already been raised, right? So there's going to be increased military spending, but at the same time, we know that globally, inflation is going up. We see that compared to just year on year, all the major commodities, save for cocoa beans and tea, I think it was tea, everything has gone up. Some a little bit, like 10-20%, which is really unusual. In a usual context, 10% per year is a lot. But then we have some more strategic commodities that have energy-related ones. Natural gas up 11-fold, right? 1,100% increase. And then we have oil gone up, doubling. And just if you look at the technical chart, I think there is no resistance until 145, 150. And there is, of course, a possibility for oil to go above 150. At which point, we have to say that a lot of the industries that are the heavy industries, the energy-intensive industries, who are running on relatively thin margins, will have to either adjust by raising prices dramatically, or just have to shut down. And we're going to see a lot of prices of a lot of consumer goods go up, and where at the same time unemployment can go up as well, because we are bound to get a stagflation scenario. I think, at least in the West, if not globally. This, I think, is already in the cards. If you listen to some of my earlier podcasts before this conflict actually started, I was already saying that there was going to be a period of high inflation with perhaps some stagnation. In fact, stagflation. I was also saying that there will be a realignment in basically in the investment sphere. So in the sense that I see that interest rate can actually go up, that what used to be good as an investment in the last 35 years could be the bad ones, and what used to be bad could be good ones. That means that perhaps in some spheres, namely tech stocks, perhaps real estate, we could actually see price coming down. So that's why I made a video before talking about there could be both inflation and deflation, and in different segments of the economy. But anyway, in this scenario, life is going to be hard, and living standards will fall, right? And then social problems, which could be plastered over when you have a continually rising living standard, can no longer be just covered up, can no longer be swept under the rugs, right? The social problems, class struggles, and in some places there could also be ethnic struggles, religious struggles. This could become more obvious, and a lot of governments, they used to use basically money printing, right? To cover up these problems. Whenever there is some issue that's really troubling a certain segment of the society, the government as a new law passes a new law, gives some money to this group, and this basically covers it up for the short term, but it does not solve the problem in the long term. And as inflation goes up, military spending goes up, living standards come down, social instability can go up. And at the same time, with the flood of weapons and mercenaries and volunteers and refugees, we will have radical thinking and radicalization become more common in that region. And that really reminds me, in a way, of 1930s Europe. So that is never a good thing. Lastly, let's move on to who I think will benefit from this and who are the losers. I think if we talk about people, civilians, the public, nobody benefits. Nobody will benefit from this sort of instability. But there are some people, some small groups of people who will benefit. And those are the people who are safe because they are separated by an ocean, and they are supplying weapons to the conflict zones. In essence, what we would see in the scenarios that I laid out would be bringing Iraq, Afghanistan, and Syria into Central and Eastern Europe. And the historic problems that Europe had to endure will be like terrorism, right? Refugee flows and burdens on the economy. They will be much more severe. And the losers, of course, as I just said, will be the Central and Eastern Europe and the EU at large. Although I don't know if the European Union will last very much longer under these circumstances. So let's just say Central and Eastern Europe. I think it does actually make sense in a way for Germany to bump up its military spending, its military budget, its defense budget, let's say, because there could be some scenarios where on the borders of Germany there is a region that is highly insecure, that is highly unstable, and that means that Germany would have to defend its borders. But at the same time, it is also worrying because even though Germany in the last few decades has been rather peaceful and the Germans are rather pacified, most Germans, you would think, I would have thought, that they are against war. But we see that recently we have a warmongering government, let's say, that's being installed, led, I think, by the Green Party, really pro-war party now. So it seems that there may be an undercurrent still in Germany, where there could be people who also are predisposed for violence and perhaps who want to join the fun of this sort of radicalization, of insurgency warfare, of proxy wars. And this means that if Germany is rearmed, Germany is militarized, and if there is a growing voice of a radical voice, Europe is really in big trouble. Then we are even closer to 1930s Europe, and that will not be fun. I think rather it is more Western European countries, and I'm not talking about Britain, because Britain is pretty much dedicated to proxy war and insurgency wars, right? I'm talking about France, Spain, Portugal, and maybe even Italy. These countries, and perhaps Greece, right? These Western and Southern European countries who are more hesitant to partake in this sort of proxy war. And I think they may be in Europe the places where it could be some comparatively stable in this regard. Of course, if Russia cannot control its border well, if Russia does not solve the conflict in a way that ensures at least stability on its borders, then make no mistake, the proxy wars, the insurgency wars, will not be limited to the current, to let's say Eastern Galicia. It will also go into what used to be the heartland of let's just say central and eastern Ukraine. Let's just say. All right, so that is my take on the possibility, the danger of instability in Central and Eastern Europe. I think this is certainly a very dark period. And it is dark not just in terms of military conflict, but also in terms of liberty, in terms of economic freedom, of financial freedom. In the next podcast, I really want to discuss the upcoming and possible decoupling of the economies, because we are now seeing that Russia is willingly or unwillingly or voluntarily or involuntarily decoupling from the Western system. Perhaps, I think, seeing the way that things go, it will not be long before China will have to sort of decouple, and there could also be some other countries who will also follow suit, that either voluntarily or involuntarily decouple from the system. And that would be something that is, to me, it's really sad, right? Because I am a traditional, I think, more traditional, liberal-minded person. I'm more, I think today you would label it as libertarian-minded, right? So I like small government, almost no government intervention, where government intervention only when it is necessary, right? I love peace. I love freedom of exchange of ideas, the economic issues, finance. I And there are people who frown upon open door immigrations. I think that it's not that bad. Of course, you need to have some control, of course. Otherwise, the region, your country will be destabilized. But, I don't think immigration or migration in general is a bad thing. I think cultural exchange is a great thing. But I think it will be difficult, and the world can evolve into two or more systems that are separate from each other. And that is a sad thing, but it's something that could very well happen. So that is the next topic for my next podcast. All right, so thank you very much for listening. If you find some points that I've raised in this podcast interesting, you can leave a comment below, and of course, like, subscribe, and share. Thank you very much, and have a great day.